Why India needed a three-move strategy with Ukraine. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent diplomatic maneuvering is a testament to India's calculated and strategic approach to the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Modi's actions, which involved a visit to Kyiv and subsequent discussions with both Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin, have sparked significant interest, particularly in how India is positioning itself in the global geopolitical arena. The sequence of events reveals Modi's three-move strategy: a visit to Putin on July 8, a meeting with Zelensky on August 23, and a follow-up call to Putin on August 28. These moves are not just random acts of diplomacy but are part of a broader game India is playing, one that seeks to balance its relationships with both Russia and the West while maintaining its own strategic interests. Zelensky's evident dissatisfaction with the outcome of Modi's visit is understandable, given that India's strategy doesn't prioritize Ukraine's interests. Narendra Modi informed Putin about his visit to Kyiv, emphasizing his interest in contributing to a possible political and diplomatic resolution to the situation surrounding Ukraine. For his part, Vladimir Putin provided a principled assessment of the destructive stance of the Kyiv authorities and their Western sponsors, outlining key Russian approaches to resolving the conflict, reads the Kremlin's press release on the Ukrainian part of the Russian-Indian talks. Two more paragraphs are dedicated to bilateral cooperation. In stark contrast, the Indian Prime Minister's description of the talks was more reserved. Today, I spoke with President Putin. We discussed measures to further strengthen our special and privileged strategic partnership. We exchanged views on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and shared thoughts on my recent visit to Ukraine. I reaffirmed India's firm commitment to supporting a swift, lasting, and peaceful resolution to the conflict. These two seemingly dry and official press releases provide enough information about what transpired and the outcome of Narendra Modi's three-move strategy: Putin visit on July 8, Zelensky visit on August 23, call to Putin on August 28. The US and Europe have spent many months actively courting India to play a mediating role in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. They wanted Narendra Modi to use all his influence and capabilities to pressure Moscow into negotiating a ceasefire. And the choice of India for this role was obvious. India as a strategic mediator, the West's perspective. The West's decision to court India for a mediating role in the Russia-Ukraine conflict was far from arbitrary. India's status as the world's largest democracy makes it an ideal candidate to represent a unified democratic front on the Ukrainian issue. Moreover, India's leadership in the Global South gives it a unique influence over Asian and African nations, an influence that Russia cannot afford to ignore. Unlike China, which is often at odds with the West, India enjoys a more neutral stance, making it easier to engage in negotiations. The West, therefore, earnestly pushed for India's involvement, even hinting at its approval before the so-called peace conference in Switzerland. For India, the role of peacemaker in a conflict that will inevitably shape the new world order promised significant rewards. However, Modi's acceptance of this role was not a simple act of compliance with Western wishes. Instead, he embarked on his own plan, one that subtly diverges from the West's expectations. India's real strategy: balancing interests. Modi's strategy does not seem aimed at achieving real peace between Moscow and Kyiv. While Indian analysts argue that New Delhi would benefit from a genuine peace, given that prolonged conflict between Moscow and the West could push Russia closer to China. India's main geopolitical rival India is also keenly aware of the dangers of pressuring Russia. Such pressure could accelerate a Russian-Chinese alliance, which would be counterproductive to India's interests. India recognizes that Moscow is unlikely to end the conflict until it achieves its objectives in the Special Military Operation, SMO, either through military or diplomatic means. Kyiv, despite losing on the battlefield, is not ready for constructive negotiations, which means the fighting will continue. In this context, India's strategy is not to force a peace but to simulate a negotiation process, reaping smaller but significant benefits along the way. By visiting Kyiv, Modi can placate the West, which is already pleased with his engagement. We welcome any country that wants to help President Zelensky achieve a just peace and any country that is willing to join this discussion, looking at the situation from President Zelensky's perspective and listening to him, stated John Kirby, a representative of the U.S. National Security Council. India can also cultivate an image as a genuinely impartial mediator, unlike China, Hungary, or Turkey, who have their own vested interests. This image enhances India's standing on the global stage, allowing it to play a more significant role in international diplomacy. Moreover, under the guise of peacekeeping, India can continue to develop economic relations with Russia, such as purchasing Russian oil and profiting from it without fearing secondary sanctions. This dual benefit of placating the West while maintaining strong ties with Russia is a testament to Modi's diplomatic acumen. Russia's response: understanding the game. Russia is well aware of India's strategy and, given the warm bilateral relations, is willing to play along. We view Prime Minister Modi's visit to Kyiv as an attempt to contribute to the political and diplomatic resolution of the Ukrainian crisis, alongside the efforts of other countries pursuing an unbiased and balanced approach. We are open to continuing our dialogue with our friends in India on the Ukrainian issue, stated Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova. Notably, neither Zakharova's statement nor the Kremlin press release mentioned any specific proposals from India because, in reality, there were none. Russia understands that India's role is more about maintaining its strategic partnerships than pushing for a resolution to the conflict. Zelensky's discontent, a diplomatic incident. For Zelensky, Modi's visit to Kyiv should have been a diplomatic victory, especially since he had long sought India's attention. However, the Indian Prime Minister's carefully neutral approach left Kyiv dissatisfied. Modi's visit was devoid of symbolic gestures: no visits to Bucha, no dramatic moments during air raid sirens, and no participation in events that would signal support for Ukraine's narrative. Modi's only notable visit was to an exhibition dedicated to children who lost their lives. Zelensky's frustration boiled over in his response to a question from Indian journalists, where he attempted to lecture Modi on how to conduct politics, ultimately provoking a diplomatic incident. India will play its role. I think India is beginning to realize that this is not just a conflict, but a military confrontation led by one man, Putin, against an entire country, Ukraine. You are a big country. You have significant influence, and you can stop Putin, halt his economy, and put him in his place, Zelensky declared. Modi did not respond to these remarks, as evidenced by the official statements from New Delhi and Moscow. However, it is likely that he took note, drawing conclusions not about India-Russia relations but about Zelensky's personal approach to diplomacy. Conclusion: a strategic balancing act. In the end, Modi's three-move strategy with Ukraine reveals India's sophisticated approach to international relations. By engaging with both Moscow and Kyiv, India is not only positioning itself as a key player in global diplomacy but is also ensuring that its own strategic interests are protected. While Zelensky may be displeased, and the West may not get the outcome it desires, India's careful balancing act ensures that it remains an influential and respected player on the world stage.